we talked about this before, this idea, and you've had it for a while, and I love it. You look at it through a three Q perspective. And could you touch on that just a little bit? Because I really feel it's the most comprehensive way of looking at a patient and what medicine should be doing.
Well, and I got to thank you for this too, for opening up the horizon of for me to kind of come up with this narrative of Q3 medicine. And it stands for quantitative, qualitative, and quantumtative. I know quantumtative is not a word. I made it up, but whatever.
No one
I
cares.
always
It sounds good.
it sounds good, right? If it's a narrative, right? So long story short, I feel as though that we could, quantify things through blood in regards to a CBC, right? And get some parameters of how big or small your red blood cell is and how many white blood cells you have and do a diff and all that other fun stuff. But it means very little to the patient that's trying to optimize their health, right? Versus, maybe what you could see behind me, a drop of blood. I don't, that has, you could see some of these little cells with little spikes on it, right?
Yeah.
And, that could be indicative of increased membrane lipid peroxidation and free radical damage and everything else. And that's a qualitative reflection of,
Mhm.
the blood. And this is a lost art, looking at blood under the microscope. Historically, when doctors would go to the hospital and make their rounds, they would actually have to go to the lab, prepare their own slides, do a diff, and do their own counts historically and look under the microscope of the blood and find the acanthocytes, echonocytes, poikilocytes, whatever it is. And they would be able to use that clinically to say, hey, there's a little bit of, stress in the liver or kidneys and free radical damage and so forth. That's no longer a part of the narrative in medicine and healthcare. And then on the quantum side, and this is where, again, I think that we are, in a safe space here, and I don't think that, a lot of allopaths have really embraced this level of processing and this departure from Newtonian physics that we all have to go through in order to get to med school, as we got to, learn how quickly that rock is going to roll down the hill at what pace and trajectory and all that other fun stuff. But it's missing that quantum leap in healthcare, which I feel as though, some of the things that you do with innovative medicine really explores a little bit deeper and with more precision. And I think right now that's quantum association, I think, is going to take into account the field that we do not have a tangible way of always being able to kind of measure and identify.
Yeah.
And I know there have been studies around, measuring subatomic particles and being able the mirroring behind that and the string theory and all of that other stuff. But applying that to medicine is a whole nother
Oh,
great leap, right?
it's
But
it's it's totally yeah, that really is a true quantum leap of just changing your whole mindset to get there, and that's difficult. I know that from my father and others. It was. You're
oh
trained
yeah,
in one way, you got to completely kind of not disregard again. That's where people I think get it wrong, Neil, is they think they need to disregard what they've learned and, relearn everything. No, you're adding on to it. And that's why the 3Q, like that made sense. It's not either or. It's not, and people think this way. I know this. Like some practitioners, like energy medicine is the future. I agree, but it's not like physical medicine is suddenly gone. Like we have to forget about it, and if the broken leg will suddenly we'll put it into a PEMF machine, and overnight it'll be better. You still got to
yeah,
set it, go through the physicality of it. So
yeah.
it's not neither or, and that's why I love what you're doing and your approach is it is comprehensive, it is collaborative, and it is bringing things together. But we live in a world that is so specialized, right? Medicine is going down further specialties, and it's not just the conventional side. I won't just, single them out because it is the alternative, the integrative side. It's the ability of a practitioner to only study one little facet of something that is considered alternative and say, this is my solution to help the patient, when we know that's the same thing as, going to a specialist that only does certain surgeries, and you may not require that surgery. They're going to want to do that surgery on you anyway.
And that's what's happening right now in precision medicine. Everybody's going through their little silos of segregation and staying in their their lanes and missing the big picture of the interconnectedness and the network analysis that's associated with all the different kind of signals and inputs or Zeitgebers or these different environmental cues that are influencing our gene expression through clock genes and how that's influencing our circadian rhythms and biology as a whole. And that refers back to the Nobel Prize a few years ago for, I think, five researchers, American researchers, that really unpacked these clock genes and how they're heavily influenced by these different environmental signals and cues. So I think that when it comes down to it, yeah, medicine could continue to go down the hyper specialization road, and I think it's needed,
Yeah.
right? Because God forbid, there's an issue, whatever that issue might be. You want that specialist.
Hmm.
You want that, right? But the thing is, we all need to play nicely in the sandbox and embrace one another, and be open to the emerging kind of concepts philosophically of this ever evolving landscape of medicine, right? Philosophically. And I do think that there's a lot of factors to it, but when it comes down to it, I'm not anti-specialists, right? Because God forbid somebody has like a stroke, right? I was just on a call with a vascular surgeon not too long ago, and we
Hmm.
were talking about some of the things that I've identified and I've seen on a molecular level that is accelerating vascular dementia, right?
Hmm.
And I said, hey, we are looking at the genes that are associated with coagulation and tubulin formation, and this is could be further quantified through neuroquant imaging, that we're seeing these patterns of nuclear atrophy within specific regions of the brain associated with levels of infection and illness, and then there's a vascular component to it. And we had an amazing talk about his experience, being a vascular neurologist, and his levels of clinical application, and it's just like, it's amazing. So everybody has their role within healthcare, right? And it's just being able to speak and share the same language, right? And that's where I think precision medicine does come into play, where, in medical school, we're still taught, genetics, we're still taught, there's RNA, and, there's proteins and metabolism, but we're not taught how to leverage this information in the personalization of healthcare. It's still this one size fits all kind of narrative of like, oh, pill for ill, do this if you got that. And it's removing all the other confounding variables influencing, the phenotypical expression, who this
Yeah, and you
person
make a
is.
good point that we don't need to suddenly get rid of specialties and everyone just go into trying to learn everything there is in the medical spectrum. That's not realistic, and I agree that's not even beneficial. It is about changing the mindset within the specialties, that it isn't
Yeah,
a pill for the ill, that we aren't just managing disease, but that we're working together in our specialties to provide solutions that actually bring about healing and actually
exactly.
bringing about the optimization of our body, mind, and spirit. And
Oh
that
yeah,
alone will guide specialties to becoming more aware of what those solutions may be within their specialized way of thinking, right? So
oh
I,
yeah,
I think the answer isn't about changing the system, it's about changing the way the system thinks about what healing is. If you believe healing is the subsiding of symptoms only, well, then we have a very different definition of what healing is, because the disease persists. The symptoms are just kind of pushed away. It's painting over the leak in the wall instead of addressing the leak on the pipe behind it. And that's where
exactly.
things need to change. That's, I know, where you've been looking at for a while.